It was early July when my parents told us we'd be spending 2 weeks in a rental house by a lake in upstate New York. At first, none of us were overly excited. Family trips usually meant long drives, no Wi-Fi, and endless arguments. But my father had found this house online, an old 2-story cabin tucked deep into the woods with its own dock on the water. The photos looked almost too perfect. A wide porch facing the lake, tall windows reflecting the sunset, and pine trees surrounding it like a wall. We packed into the car, me, my 2 brothers, and our parents, and drove for hours. The further we went, the thinner traffic became, until eventually it felt like we were the only car left on the road. By the time we turned down the narrow gravel driveway that led to the cabin, our cell signals were already gone. The house stood alone at the edge of the water, its dark wood siding weathered and old. From a distance, it looked peaceful, almost postcard-worthy. Up close, though, I noticed the little details. Boards warped slightly from damp, windows smudged, the faint smell of mildew drifting out when Dad pushed the front door open. Inside was bigger than I expected. A living room with an old stone fireplace, a long wooden table, and stairs that creaked if you even looked at them. We each picked rooms, my parents downstairs, the 3 of us boys upstairs. I got the corner room that looked out over the lake. At first I thought I'd lucked out. That first evening, we sat outside on the porch, eating sandwiches and watching the lake turn gold as the sun went down. My younger brother, Ryan, tossed pebbles into the water, while my older brother, Daniel, leaned against the railing with his headphones on, pretending he wasn't paying attention to us. The air was calm, not even a breeze. My mom kept saying how peaceful it all felt, how this was exactly what we needed. But I couldn't shake a strange feeling. From the porch, across the lake, you could see a line of pines thick enough that the other side was hidden. As the light faded, the tree line turned into a black wall, and it almost felt like the woods were watching us back. At one point, I thought I saw a faint ripple move across the water, though no one had thrown a rock. Too wide for a fish, too slow for a bird. When I pointed it out, Dad said it was probably just a current, but the lake had been still all evening. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, I sat by my window for a while. The moon was bright enough to make the lake shine silver, but the trees beyond it were nothing but shadow. I stared at them until my eyes hurt, half expecting to see movement, a figure, something. And then I noticed something strange. Just at the edge of the dock, where the wood met the black water, there was a shape. It wasn't clear, just a darker patch against the reflection of the lake. At first, I thought it was a log, or maybe a pile of weeds washed up against the posts. But then, slowly, it shifted. Not floating away, not bobbing like something loose in the water, but as if it were pulling itself closer to the dock. I blinked, leaned closer to the glass, but when I looked again, the shape was gone. I told myself it was just the water playing tricks on me in the moonlight. I shut the curtains, climbed into bed, and tried to laugh it off. But even as I drifted to sleep, I couldn't shake the thought. Something had been there. I woke up sometime after midnight to the sound of water. At first, I thought it was just waves lapping against the dock, but the lake had been completely calm earlier. This sounded different, like something heavier moving through it. I lay still, listening. The house was quiet, otherwise. My parents' room was downstairs, and both my brothers were asleep in the rooms across the hall. The water noises came in uneven bursts, splashes, then silence, then another faint ripple, like someone waiting, slowly, just beneath my window. I pushed the blanket aside and went to the window. The curtains stuck slightly when I pulled them back, and for a second, I hesitated before looking out. The moon was bright enough to light up the water, turning it pale silver. The dock stretched out like a narrow finger into the lake, and there, at the very end of it, was a figure. I froze, my breath catching. It wasn't clear at first, just a tall, dark outline. Whoever it was stood perfectly still, facing the trees across the lake, not the house. I blinked hard, thinking maybe I was imagining it. But no, the figure was real. I wanted to wake Daniel or Ryan, but something about the stillness kept me from moving. My body just locked up. After what felt like forever, the figure shifted. The head turned, slowly, deliberately, until it was facing the cabin, facing me. That was enough. I stumbled back from the window, heart pounding, and practically dove into bed, yanking the covers up even though I knew it was useless. I stayed like that, rigid, listening for footsteps on the porch or the creak of the stairs. Nothing. At some point, exhaustion pulled me under, and when I opened my eyes again, morning sunlight was flooding the room. Downstairs, Dad was already making coffee. Ryan sat at the table eating cereal, and Daniel scrolled on his phone, somehow managing to pick up a weak signal near the window. I wanted to tell them what I'd seen, but the words stuck. How could I explain it without sounding crazy? I saw someone standing on the dock in the middle of the night, staring at us. No way they'd believe me. Instead, I mumbled something about not sleeping well. After breakfast, we all went outside. The sun reflected off the water so bright it hurt my eyes. The dock looked completely ordinary, the boards dry and weathered. Nothing unusual. Still, I found myself staring at the far end, my stomach tight. That's when Ryan spoke. "Did you guys hear it last night?" he asked suddenly, tossing a rock into the water. "Hear what?" Dad asked. Ryan shrugged, but his expression was uneasy. "Sounded like footsteps on the dock. I thought it was one of you." My skin prickled. I hadn't told him what I'd seen. Daniel laughed, shaking his head. "Probably raccoons or something. You two are acting like city kids who've never heard animals before." But I noticed Ryan glance at me, as if he knew we'd both experienced something we weren't ready to admit. The day passed slowly. Dad took us fishing, though none of us caught anything. Mom sat on the porch with a book, insisting she was finally relaxed. For a while, it almost felt normal. Just a family vacation, nothing strange. But as evening fell, the uneasiness returned. The woods across the lake darkened quickly, and the stillness settled over everything again. It was the kind of silence where every little sound felt sharp. The creak of the dock, the splash of a fish, even the wind in the trees seemed louder than it should. That night, I lay in bed again, staring at the ceiling. I tried to convince myself not to look out the window, not to check the dock. But curiosity gnawed at me. Eventually, I couldn't resist. I pulled the curtain back just an inch. The dock was empty. Relief washed over me, until I noticed the water. It was rippling, not from wind, not from fish. The ripples were moving in a straight line, as though something was gliding just beneath the surface, heading slowly toward the shore, and it was coming directly toward the cabin. I woke up sometime after midnight to the sound of water. At first, I thought it was just waves lapping against the dock, but the lake had been completely calm earlier. This sounded different, like something heavier moving through it. I lay still, listening. The house was quiet, otherwise. My parents' room was downstairs, and both my brothers were asleep in the rooms across the hall. The water noises came in uneven bursts, splashes, then silence, then another faint ripple, like someone wading, slowly, just beneath my window. I pushed the blanket aside and went to the window. The curtains stuck slightly when I pulled them back, and for a second, I hesitated before looking out. The moon was bright enough to light up the water, turning it pale silver. The dock stretched out like a narrow finger into the lake, and there, at the very end of it, was a figure. I froze, my breath catching. It wasn't clear at first, just a tall, dark outline. Whoever it was stood perfectly still, facing the trees across the lake, not the house. I blinked hard, thinking maybe I was imagining it. But no, the figure was real. I wanted to wake Daniel or Ryan, but something about the stillness kept me from moving. My body just locked up. After what felt like forever, the figure shifted. The head turned, slowly, deliberately, until it was facing the cabin, facing me. That was enough. I stumbled back from the window, heart pounding, and practically dove into bed, yanking the covers up even though I knew it was useless. I stayed like that, rigid, listening for footsteps on the porch or the creak of the stairs. Nothing. At some point, exhaustion pulled me under, and when I opened my eyes again, morning sunlight was flooding the room. Downstairs, Dad was already making coffee. Ryan sat at the table eating cereal, and Daniel scrolled on his phone, somehow managing to pick up a weak signal near the window. I wanted to tell them what I'd seen, but the words stuck. How could I explain it without sounding crazy? I saw someone standing on the dock in the middle of the night, staring at us. No way they'd believe me. Instead, I mumbled something about not sleeping well. After breakfast, we all went outside. The sun reflected off the water so bright it hurt my eyes. The dock looked completely ordinary, the boards dry and weathered. Nothing unusual. Still, I found myself staring at the far end, my stomach tight. That's when Ryan spoke. "Did you guys hear it last night?" he asked suddenly, tossing a rock into the water. "Hear what?" Dad asked. Ryan shrugged, but his expression was uneasy. "Sounded like footsteps on the dock. I thought it was one of you." My skin prickled. I hadn't told him what I'd seen. Daniel laughed, shaking his head. "Probably raccoons or something. You two are acting like city kids who've never heard animals before." But I noticed Ryan glance at me, as if he knew we'd both experienced something we weren't ready to admit. The day passed slowly. Dad took us fishing, though none of us caught anything. Mom sat on the porch with a book, insisting she was finally relaxed. For a while, it almost felt normal. Just a family vacation, nothing strange. But as evening fell, the uneasiness returned. The woods across the lake darkened quickly, and the stillness settled over everything again. It was the kind of silence where every little sound felt sharp. The creak of the dock, the splash of a fish, even the wind in the trees seemed louder than it should. That night, I lay in bed again, staring at the ceiling. I tried to convince myself not to look out the window, not to check the dock. But curiosity gnawed at me. Eventually, I couldn't resist. I pulled the curtain back just an inch. The dock was empty. Relief washed over me, until I noticed the water. It was rippling, not from wind, not from fish. The ripples were moving in a straight line, as though something was gliding just beneath the surface, heading slowly toward the shore, and it was coming directly toward the cabin. The next morning, breakfast was unusually quiet. Mom sat at the table with her coffee, staring at the lake through the window instead of reading like she usually did. Dad was flipping through a local guidebook he'd picked up at the grocery store, though it looked like he wasn't really paying attention to the words. Finally, Mom spoke. "Did either of you go out to the dock last night?" Her question made me freeze. Ryan and I exchanged a glance. "Why?" Dad asked. She hesitated before answering. "Because when I got up early this morning, I noticed something on the boards. Wet footprints, bare feet." The room went silent. Daniel laughed, shaking his head. "Probably one of us, Mom. You know, walking out there after dark." "I didn't," I said quickly. "Me neither," Ryan added. Dad frowned. "I didn't either. And your mom's right. I saw them too. They led right up to the end of the dock." He paused, then added in a quieter voice, "But they didn't come back." That last detail made the hair on my arms stand up. Later that afternoon, Dad decided to check the dock again. He walked the length of it slowly, Ryan trailing behind him. I stayed on the porch, watching. From where I sat, the boards looked normal, just sun-bleached wood. But when Dad knelt down, I could see him run his fingers along one of the planks. Even from a distance, I could tell his face had changed. When they came back, Ryan's expression said everything. "There were marks," he told me quietly when Dad went inside. "Like scratches, long ones, in the wood, at the very end." I didn't know what to say. Scratches could have come from anything, right? Old wood, animals, even kids messing around. But something about the way he said it made my stomach twist. That evening, Dad tried to distract us with a fire in the old stone fireplace. We roasted marshmallows, played cards, tried to act normal. For a while, it almost worked. The flicker of the flames and the crackle of burning wood made the cabin feel cozy, even safe. But when the fire died down and the house grew quiet again, the unease returned. I lay awake longer than usual, listening. Every creak of the cabin made me tense. I told myself not to look out the window, but of course, I did. The dock was empty. The lake was still. But across the water, near the tree line, there was a faint light. At first, I thought it might be a campfire, a small orange glow flickering through the trees. But as I stared, I realized it wasn't fire. It was a single lantern, swinging slowly back and forth as if someone was carrying it. My chest tightened. I watched it move along the shore, weaving between the trees, sometimes vanishing, then reappearing again. I wanted to wake Ryan, but I couldn't pull myself from the window. The lantern kept moving, getting closer to the edge of the woods directly across from the cabin. And then, all at once, it went out. The blackness swallowed everything. The next morning, I told Ryan what I'd seen. He believed me instantly. But when we mentioned it at breakfast, Mom and Dad exchanged a look neither of them tried to explain. Finally, Dad said, "It's nothing. Probably campers." But his voice didn't sound convinced. That night, Dad quietly checked the locks on every window and door, and for the first time since we arrived, I could tell he was scared too. The cabin felt different after that night. Even during the day, when sunlight spilled through the windows and the air was warm and bright, there was a heaviness that hadn't been there before. No one said it out loud, but we were all on edge. Mom kept busy, cooking and straightening things that didn't need straightening. Dad stayed glued to his book, like he was determined to ignore everything else. Daniel pretended nothing was happening, but even he wasn't going down to the dock anymore. Ryan and I, though, we kept noticing things. It started with the sounds. The first time, I thought it was just mice. A faint scratching in the walls while we were upstairs playing cards. But then it moved. Fast. Too fast for a mouse. Trailing along the length of the hall, stopping outside my bedroom door. Ryan froze, eyes wide. "You hear that?" Before I could answer, the sound stopped. We both jumped when Dad called up the stairs. "Boys, you running around up there?" "No!" we yelled back in unison. Later that night, when everyone was asleep, the noise came again. Scraping. Slow, steady, as if someone were dragging a fingernail or something sharper along the inside of the walls. It wasn't just one spot either. The sound traveled, circling the upstairs hallway. At one point, I swear I heard a faint breath. Not ours. Something low, exhaling through the wood. I didn't sleep at all. The next morning, I thought maybe I'd imagined it, until Ryan pulled up his sleeve at breakfast. "There were noises last night," he said firmly, looking right at Dad, "and I'm not the only one who heard it." On his forearm were 2 red scratches. Shallow, but real. Daniel scoffed. "You probably did that to yourself." Ryan shook his head. "I woke up with them." Dad didn't say anything for a long moment. Finally, he set his mug down and rubbed his temples. "This house is old. Animals get into places like this. Squirrels, raccoons. Could even be bats in the walls." But I saw the way Mom's hand trembled as she stirred her coffee. She didn't believe it either. That evening, the noises returned, but this time, everyone heard them. We were in the living room, the fire crackling low, when the sound started overhead. A long, dragging scrape across the ceiling. Then another. Mom dropped her book, her face pale. Dad stood quickly, his chair scraping against the floor. "Stay here," he said, grabbing a flashlight. He disappeared up the stairs while the rest of us sat frozen. The silence stretched until every second felt like an hour. Then, suddenly, bang! The sound echoed through the whole house, like something heavy slamming against the upstairs wall. We all jumped. Ryan grabbed my arm so hard his nails dug into my skin. Daniel's face went blank, all his usual arrogance gone. "Dad!" Mom called out, her voice tight. No answer. Another bang, louder this time. Mom stood, her hands shaking, but before she could move, Dad came running back down the stairs. His face was pale, his jaw clenched. "There's nothing up there," he said quickly, too quickly. "It's just the wind hitting the siding. Nothing more." But he was lying. We all knew it. That night, Dad dragged one of the armchairs into the hallway and sat there with the flashlight across his lap. He didn't go to bed. He didn't even try. And that was the moment I realized, whatever was happening here, he wasn't sure he could protect us from it. By the 6th night, the cabin no longer felt like a vacation home. It felt like a trap. Nobody said it out loud, but we were all sleeping less. Even Daniel, who had spent the first few days mocking Ryan and me, now kept his door shut tight at night. He didn't laugh anymore when the noises came. He just put his headphones in and tried to drown them out. Dad was running on coffee and stubbornness. Every evening, he would double-check the doors and windows, pulling each lock twice, then drag the same armchair into the upstairs hallway. He'd sit there with the flashlight, as if his presence alone could keep whatever was happening away. But it didn't. Because on the 6th night, we didn't just hear it. We saw it. It started around 2 a.m. I hadn't fallen asleep yet. I couldn't. My nerves were shot, every creak of the old wood making me tense. I was staring at the ceiling when I noticed a faint glow moving across the crack under my door. At first, I thought it was Dad with the flashlight pacing the hall. But then I realized the light wasn't steady. It flickered, dim to bright, like it wasn't coming from a flashlight at all. More like a lantern. My throat tightened. I sat up slowly, straining to listen. That's when I heard the sound. Footsteps, soft but deliberate, moving across the hallway floorboards. Too slow to be Dad. Too careful. The light paused right outside my door. I held my breath, staring at the bottom edge. The glow flickered there for several long seconds, spilling just slightly into my room. And then something else appeared. A shadow. Long, thin, its outline stretching across the gap like it was standing perfectly still. I couldn't move. And then, without warning, the shadow bent down, as if someone, or something, were crouching right outside my door, their head level with the floor, listening. That broke me. I bolted upright, grabbed the nearest thing I could find, a heavy book from the nightstand, and shouted, "Dad!" The footsteps outside my door moved instantly, quick but smooth, like sliding rather than running. The light vanished. Dad's chair scraped across the floor a second later, and his flashlight beam swept over the hallway. What happened? By then, Ryan and Daniel were awake too, their doors cracked open. I pointed at the bottom of mine, my voice shaking. Someone was out here. I saw them. They had a light. Dad didn't hesitate. He stormed through the hallway, yanking open every door, even checking the bathroom and closets. Nothing. But when he reached the end of the hall near the window, his light caught something on the floor. A wet footprint. It was faint, half-dried, but it was there, longer than any of ours, with water still glistening on the wood. And there wasn't just one. There were several, trailing down the hallway, ending right in front of my door. No one said a word. We just stared at them. Finally, Mom came up the stairs, pale and wide-eyed. "We need to leave," she whispered. Dad shook his head, though I could see the fear in his eyes. "It's the middle of the night. We're not driving out on those roads in the dark. We'll go in the morning." But none of us slept again. We sat together in the living room with the lights on, listening to the silence press against the windows. And sometime, just before dawn, as I fought to keep my eyes open, I thought I saw it again. Through the largest window that faced the lake. A figure standing at the edge of the dock, its shoulders hunched, head tilted unnaturally, watching the cabin. As soon as daylight broke, Mom insisted again that we pack up and go. This time, Dad didn't argue. His face was tight, his voice clipped. "All right," he said. "Everyone, grab your things. We'll load the car and head back into town." No one hesitated. Within an hour, our bags were stuffed into the trunk, and we were all crammed into the car. The gravel driveway stretched out in front of us, winding between the trees. For the first time in days, I felt a flicker of relief, like maybe we were finally leaving it all behind. But halfway down the drive, the car shuddered. A deep, grinding noise came from underneath, followed by a loud pop. Dad cursed and pulled over. The car leaned sharply to one side. One of the back tires had blown out completely, the rubber shredded as if it had been slashed. Daniel muttered, "You've got to be kidding me." Dad got out, jaw clenched, and inspected the damage. "Spare's in the trunk," he said, trying to sound calm. But when he opened it, the spare was already flat. Not just flat, ruined. A long, clean gash ran across the rubber. Someone had cut it. Mom's face went white. "We're not staying here another night," she whispered. "I don't care. We'll walk to town if we have to." Town was over 15 miles away, through endless stretches of thick woods. Still, Dad didn't argue. He told us to grab water bottles and backpacks. His hands shook slightly as he zipped one shut. We set out on foot, walking single file down the narrow road. The trees crowded in on both sides, their branches arching overhead like a tunnel. The air was heavy, still, as if even the birds didn't want to make a sound. Every step crunched loud against the gravel. Too loud. After about an hour, Ryan spoke in a whisper. "Do you guys feel like we're being followed?" I'd already felt it, the sense of eyes on us, the prickle at the back of my neck. I glanced behind us. but the road was empty, stretching back into shadow. Still, I couldn't shake it. Then Daniel stopped walking. "Listen," he said. We froze. At first there was nothing, just silence. Then faintly, a sound drifted through the trees. Footsteps, not ours. Slow, measured, keeping pace with us. When we stopped, they stopped. When we moved, they moved. "Back to the cabin," Dad said suddenly, his voice firm but low. "Now." "What?" Mom hissed. "We can't be out here in the open," he said. "Back, now." None of us argued. We turned and hurried back the way we'd come, walking fast, then nearly jogging. I couldn't help but glance behind us again, and that's when I saw it. Between the trees, maybe 50 yards back, a figure, tall, still, almost blending with the shadows. It wasn't walking, it was just standing there, watching. I opened my mouth to say something, but when I blinked, it was gone. We made it back to the cabin in record time, slamming the door shut behind us. Everyone was breathing hard, Mom on the verge of panic. Dad locked the door, then stood there, silent, his hand gripping the knob like it was the only thing keeping us safe. "What now?" Daniel demanded. His voice was shaking, despite how hard he tried to hide it. Dad didn't answer right away. Finally, he said, "We wait. Just until I figure something out." That night, we all stayed in the living room together. No one wanted to be alone. We pushed furniture against the doors and kept the lights on. But sometime after midnight, the power went out. The house dropped into instant blackness. And from outside, across the lake, came a sound that froze me in place. The low, steady rhythm of voices chanting again. Only this time, they were closer. Much closer. The chanting started faint, like an echo across the lake. But within minutes, it grew louder, layered voices humming in a rhythm that made the floorboards under our feet seem to vibrate. Mom pressed her hands over her ears, whispering, "No, no." Dad grabbed the flashlight, flicking it on. "Stay close," he said, his voice low but sharp. He swept the beam across the living room, then toward the windows. The glass rattled faintly, as though the sound itself pressed against it. I pulled Ryan closer. He was shaking, clutching my arm so hard his nails dug into my skin. Then the sound changed. The chant cut off all at once, replaced by silence. The kind of silence that felt thick, heavy, wrong. Daniel exhaled, shaky. Maybe they left. And then, knock, not on the door, from inside the house. We all froze. Dad slowly turned toward the hallway that led to the back bedrooms. The knock had come from there, sharp, deliberate, against the wall. Knock, knock, knock. The sound moved. First one bedroom, then the next, as if something was walking inside the walls, rapping on them as it passed. "Stay here," Dad whispered. He started toward the hall. "Don't," Mom hissed, grabbing his arm. But Dad shook her off, gripping the flashlight like a weapon. He stepped slowly into the hallway, the beam cutting through the dark. We sat rigid on the couch, barely breathing. I could hear the boards creak under his weight as he moved deeper into the house. Then the flashlight flickered, went out. "Dad?" Daniel called, his voice cracking. No answer. A moment later, the flashlight beam snapped back on, but it wasn't steady. It swung wildly, flashing across the walls and ceiling, as if Dad was struggling with something. "Dad!" Ryan shouted, and then we heard it. A deep, guttural growl, low and unnatural, followed by the thud of something heavy hitting the floor. Mom bolted up. "Stay here," she ordered, and ran down the hallway. We couldn't sit still. Daniel and I jumped up, dragging Ryan with us, and followed. The beam of the flashlight lay on the floor, rolling in circles, casting dizzy shadows across the walls. Dad was on the ground, dazed, blood trickling from his forehead. Mom knelt beside him, trying to pull him up. "What happened?" Daniel demanded. Before Dad could answer, a cold gust of air swept down the hallway, rattling the doors. All 3 bedroom doors slammed shut at once with deafening force. Then came the whispers. Not chanting now, whispers. Dozens of voices hissing, overlapping, spilling out from behind the doors. They weren't in English. They weren't in any language I recognized. But the tone was enough. Low, mocking, furious. Ryan clamped his hands over his ears. "Make it stop," he cried. Mom shouted, "Back to the living room." She pulled Dad to his feet, and we stumbled together out of the hallway. Behind us, one of the doors shuddered violently, as if something inside was trying to break it open. We dragged a heavy chair into the hall and wedged it against the doorframe. The whispers didn't stop. If anything, they got louder, angrier, the walls themselves seeming to pulse with the sound. Dad, pale and shaken, whispered, "It's not outside anymore." And he was right. Whatever was haunting the lake was now in the cabin with us. The whispers didn't fade. They crawled through the cabin like smoke, seeping under the doors, sliding down the walls, wrapping around us no matter where we moved. We huddled together in the living room. The air was colder than it had been all week, like the fireplace had gone out, though it still burned faintly. Dad pressed a hand to his bleeding forehead, his eyes glassy but determined. "We can't just sit here anymore. If we do, it's going to get worse." Mom shot him a look. "And what do you expect us to do? Fight it? With what?" He grabbed the heavy iron poker from beside the fireplace, gripping it tightly. "With whatever we have." Ryan whimpered, burying his face into my arm. Daniel paced, his jaw tight, fists clenched. "He's right," Daniel muttered. "It's not leaving. It's already in here." The whispers shifted suddenly, like laughter, overlapping, echoing in every corner of the room. My skin prickled. Dad stood up, poker in hand, and pointed toward the hallway where the 3 bedroom doors had slammed shut earlier. "It's in there, all of us together. We're going to see what we're dealing with." Mom shook her head furiously. "No, no, no." But none of us could take the suffocating waiting any longer. Daniel moved first, snatching up the flashlight. I followed, heart pounding, dragging Ryan with me despite his protests. Finally, Mom came too, one arm wrapped tightly around Ryan's shoulders. The hallway was colder than the rest of the cabin, the air thick, heavy, sour like rotting wood. The doors still rattled occasionally, though softer now, almost expectant. Dad planted himself in front of the first bedroom, lifted the poker, and yanked the door open. The room was empty, no whispers, no movement. Just the faint smell of damp earth and a single wet footprint on the wooden floor, leading from the window to the center of the room, and stopping. Daniel swept the flashlight across the room. Nothing. Dad closed the door firmly and moved to the second one. He paused, bracing himself, then shoved it open. At first glance, it looked the same, empty. But then the light caught something in the corner, a chair, and sitting in that chair was a figure, tall, thin, its skin grayish, stretched tight over bones, its head tilted unnaturally, just like the shadow I'd seen outside my door nights ago. Its eyes were open, glassy, reflecting the beam of the flashlight like 2 dull coins. It didn't move. None of us breathed. Then it opened its mouth. The sound that poured out wasn't human. Not a scream, not a growl, but every whisper we'd been hearing all week, spilling out at once, layered, tangled, deafening. The voices filled the hallway until it felt like the walls would burst. Ryan shrieked. Mom yanked him back. Dad, gripping the poker with both hands, stepped forward and swung. The iron connected with the figure's shoulder and went straight through. The chair toppled, crashing against the floor, but the figure didn't fall. It just rose, slowly, its limbs bending wrong, its head rolling side to side, like it was studying us. The whispers grew sharper, angrier. "Back!" Dad shouted, pulling us toward the living room. Daniel dropped the flashlight in the panic, and for a split second, the beam rolled across the figure's face. Its mouth was still open, wider now, too wide. The skin stretched until it split at the corners, tearing. But the voices kept spilling out. We stumbled into the living room, slamming the door behind us, and shoved the couch against it. But the whispers didn't stay in that room. They were everywhere now, inside the walls, inside our heads. Ryan was sobbing. Daniel was cursing under his breath. Mom was holding on to Dad like she knew he was the only thing keeping us together. And I realized something. The figure in the chair wasn't the only one. Because out of the corner of my eye, through the wide cabin windows facing the lake, I saw movement. Shapes. Tall, thin shapes. Not one, not two, but dozens. All standing at the edge of the lake, all facing the cabin, and all of them waiting. The living room was no longer safe. The whispers pressed against the walls, crawling beneath the floorboards, slipping into our ears like poison, Ryan was trembling so hard his teeth chattered, and Mom pulled him against her chest, whispering prayers that were immediately swallowed by that otherworldly noise. Dad gripped the fireplace poker like it was the only weapon left in the world. His knuckles were white, his body shaking, but not from fear alone. He was ready to fight. Daniel stood at the window, staring out at the lake. His voice cracked when he finally spoke. "They're getting closer." I forced myself to look. The figures, those tall, thin shapes, had moved. Where before they stood at the water's edge, now they were halfway across the clearing. Their movements weren't normal. They glided, their limbs jerking like broken marionettes. Every step seemed too smooth, too long, as if their feet never quite touched the ground. The moonlight made their faces clear now, hollow sockets where eyes should have been, mouths stretched too wide, drooling shadow, and all of them were facing our cabin. "Don't look at them," Mom hissed suddenly, pulling Daniel away from the glass. "Don't you dare look at them." Her voice was sharp, panicked, but it wasn't random. She said it like she knew. "Why?" I asked, though my throat felt tight, like the question barely escaped. She shook her head furiously. "I don't know. I just know. I can feel it. The moment you look at them too long, it feels like they crawl inside your head." And she was right. Even in those few seconds, my mind felt hazy, my chest heavy, as though their gaze, even without eyes, was a weight pressing me down. The pounding started again, not at the door this time, at the walls. From outside, dozens of hands, or whatever they had, slapped, scratched, dragged along the wood, circling us. The sound came from every direction, enclosing us like prey. Dad shouted over the noise, "We have to move! Now!" "Where?" Daniel demanded. "The car," Dad said without hesitation. "We make a run for it." But when he pulled back the curtain to peek outside, his voice faltered. The car was gone. Where it had been parked in the driveway was now nothing but wet tire tracks leading into the trees, fading into the dark. We all froze. Nobody moved it. Nobody had the keys except Dad. The whispering swelled louder, filling every corner of the room, until it wasn't just sound. It was inside us. My teeth ached, my vision blurred. Ryan screamed, covering his ears, but it didn't stop. And then, silence. It cut off so suddenly it was like the world had been muted. Every one of us held our breath. Then, 3 slow knocks came from the hallway. Not the door, not the windows, from inside. Dad raised the poker again. Daniel grabbed a heavy lamp, holding it like a bat. Mom pushed Ryan behind her, her eyes wide, her lips trembling with words she couldn't form. The knocks came again, this time closer. 1, 2, 3. Then, from the shadows of the hallway, a figure stepped out, but it wasn't tall or thin. It was me. I swear to God, it was me. Same clothes, same face, same wide, terrified eyes. Except the mouth. The mouth was stretched unnaturally, cracked at the corners, dripping something black and thick. It smiled at me, and when it spoke, it used my voice. "You're not leaving," Ryan screamed again, but Dad lunged first. He swung the poker with a desperate roar, striking the thing across the head. It staggered but didn't fall. Instead, it twisted, its body stretching longer, limbs bending out of shape until it towered over him. The whispers flooded back, so loud I thought my eardrums would burst. "Run!" Dad yelled, shoving us toward the back door. We didn't hesitate. Daniel grabbed Ryan, Mom clutched my arm, and we sprinted through the kitchen. The door burst open under Dad's shove, and cold night air rushed in. We ran. The forest swallowed us almost immediately, the cabin disappearing behind the black shapes of trees. Branches clawed at my skin, roots caught my shoes, but we didn't stop. The whispers followed, echoing between the trunks, bouncing off the ground everywhere at once. At one point, I glanced back. The figures were coming, gliding between the trees. Hundreds now, their hollow sockets glowing faintly white, their mouths open wider and wider, spilling sound that wasn't meant for human ears. We stumbled onto the old dirt road leading out of the woods. For one desperate, hopeful moment, I thought we'd made it. I thought we'd outrun them. Then the headlights appeared. A car, approaching fast. Dad waved both arms, screaming for help. The rest of us cried out, voices ragged, desperate. The car slowed. Headlights beamed over us. Relief almost made my knees buckle. But when I looked through the windshield, my stomach turned to ice. The driver wasn't human. It was one of them. Tall, thin, mouth too wide. Its long fingers gripped the steering wheel like it had been driving forever. The car rolled to a stop only a few feet away, the headlights blinding. And then every whisper stopped. We stood frozen on that road, the five of us huddled together. The forest behind us crawled with those figures. The road ahead glared with impossible light. And in that silence, I realized something awful. This wasn't our vacation anymore. It was theirs.